Exactly how long does the WWE plan on running the Bloodline storyline? What is the newest update regarding AEW All In, not only this year, but next year? And what rumored stipulation will be added to the CM Punk and Drew McIntyre rematch at Bash in Berlin? All this and more on the J Area Podcast. What is going on, wrestling fans? My name is Jose Ramos Jr. Welcome back to another episode of the J Area Podcast. And this past weekend, I had the great opportunity to watch the latest installment in the Alien franchise, Alien Romulus. And I gotta say, it definitely exceeded my expectations. For those who have been following the channel, been following the podcast, you would know that aside from professional wrestling, I'm very much a big fan of movies, a big movie buff, if you will. And watching Alien, it really got me thinking about these well written and well intricate storylines and how long we are able to carry out these franchises. Of course, when we go to the movies to see these blockbuster films, we want to be able to escape our reality. We want to be able to be just entrusted upon the story that is being laid out. The only issue is in Hollywood nowadays, there's that fine line of being able to successfully create a franchise and a legacy that moves forward with the story while also serving its fan base, but also running that risk of running the story just far too long and really just wrenching out every little ounce of creativity of its respective property. And that got me thinking about how the WWE has been running this Bloodline storyline. It's a storyline that really began in 2020 when Roman Reigns made his shocking return at SummerSlam, attacking The Fiend, attacking Braun Strowman, and leading to this new era, the Tribal Chief era for Roman Reigns, and what quite frankly became his most successful, his most compelling run in his professional wrestling career. The groundwork and the foundation that was built for this current era of professional wrestling, at least within the WWE, was laid before that shocking return at SummerSlam. Obviously, we saw Roman Reigns, get away from the Shield, become his own individual, and even form a partnership with his cousins, the Usos. It wouldn't be the exact incarnation that we're used to within the bloodline, but you could see the building blocks being placed as early as 2015, 2016. And with that, we were able to, again, lay down the bricks for the foundation that became the bloodline. There was an interesting quote that Paul Heyman was interviewed a couple WrestleManias ago, asking what inning we were in. And he told them the third inning. That was back at WrestleMania 39. We are now approaching the fall of 2024 with WrestleMania 41 on the horizon. And that begs the question, what inning are we in now? Now that we've seen Roman Reigns fall as the Universal Champion, that the Usos and Roman Reigns are no longer a cohesive unit. We've seen the Sami Zayns come and go. We've seen Solo Sikoa assume the role of Tribal Chief, inviting outsiders like the Gorillas of Destiny, like the Samoan werewolf Jacob Fatu. So where else can we go? And I would be remiss to not mention one Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. His introduction to this storyline really stretches it out. We could have hit a point where the Bloodline storyline was jumping the shark, that it was no longer interesting, that there was no other bases to cover. When there was a time before the Sami Zayn introduction, there might have been a little bit of a lull, but then here comes Sami Zayn, and it adds another layer of entertainment, of storytelling to the Bloodline. And then we get to WrestleMania 39. He defeats Cody Rhodes, and we're wondering what's next. Then we throw in the Bloodline Civil War, where the Usos would take on Roman Reigns and Solo Sikoa. Jey Uso leaves the team, leaves the group, leaves the Bloodline. Then we move forward to the introduction of The Rock, the WrestleMania 40 storyline. Then Roman Reigns takes a step back, and Solo assumes that role. Jimmy is essentially kicked out of the group. The Tongans are introduced. Jacob Fatu is introduced. Every single time this storyline seems to lose its steam, manages to lose a little bit of interest, they introduce another detail into the story, keeping it going. In 2023 WrestleMania 39, Paul Heyman infamously said, "The third inning." At WrestleMania 40, when Roman Reigns was defeated by Cody Rhodes, ending his 1,316 day as champion, Paul Heyman was once again asked about the innings. And he naturally, in character, was upset about the question, as if it was some kind of sign of disrespect. But this past weekend at the Fanatics event, he once again brought up the innings metaphor and saying the third inning steal, that we're still in the third inning. Obviously, I think that's hyperbolic. I think there has to have been some sort of improvement over the last 2 years. But it gets you wondering on what else we can tell with this Bloodline storyline. We just saw Roman Reigns return at SummerSlam. He laid his hands on the Gorillas of Destiny, and this past week against Solo Sikoa. But what we haven't seen in quite some time is Roman Reigns receive a beatdown like he did against this new version of the Bloodline, to the point where the Samoan werewolf Jacob Fatu really stood out and basically manhandled Roman Reigns in a fashion, again, that we have not seen, at least for quite some time. If you missed it, go ahead and look back at my post-show reaction to Friday Night SmackDown, where I share my initial thoughts to that. But in what led to that beatdown and eventually resulted in a triple power bomb by Tama Tonga, by Solo Sikoa, and Jacob Fatu, Roman Reigns was left in a heap at the foot of the current tribal chief, Solo Sikoa. There's so much more meat to be taken off the bone. We are eventually going to have that matchup between Roman and Solo. I would very much like to see a match between Jacob and Roman. And I think we will get that Bloodline War Games matchup at Survivor Series. It just makes too much sense. Now, whether or not it's going to be a 4-on-4 or a 5-on-5, that is something that's going to have to be determined at a later date. But as long as you maintain the integrity of the key players, the Tongans, Jacob, Solo, and on the other hand, Roman, the Usos, and Sami Zayn, hopefully. But then you have other options like Zilla Fatu, like Hikuleo, potentially The Rock. I don't think so. I don't think The Rock makes his way into a War Games matchup. I think that'd be fantastic. It would be very entertaining to see that. But I think this all leads to WrestleMania 41. Roman Reigns versus The Rock, the match that people have been awaiting for nearly 10 years. You go all the way back to the Royal Rumble 2015, when Roman Reigns won that match, and The Rock is seen holding his hand up, trying to symbolically pass the torch. The fans were going to have it. You could even go back 2 years prior at the Royal Rumble in 2013, when The Rock was fighting CM Punk for the WWE title and would be attacked by The Shield, whose members, of course, were Seth Rollins, Dean Ambrose, now Jon Moxley, and one Roman Reigns. Everything counts. Every little detail counts, and I love it. I'm all here for it. That should be the main event of WrestleMania 41. Will it happen? Like I said, to be determined. Because we did see that Cody Rhodes was next on The Rock's list. That could happen at the Royal Rumble. Certainly. And then that leaves the room open for WrestleMania for The Rock versus Roman. A lot of ground to cover in between, though. Currently, as it stands, Roman Reigns is left solo against Solo. He has no help, and he's outnumbered 4-1. Eventually, I think he's going to have to swallow his pride and go back to the Usos. The very same Usos that he verbally assaulted, ridiculed, embarrassed at times, and perhaps even Sami Zayn. Maybe even Cody, if they need that 5v5. And until then, we have to look at Sami and Jey Uso rekindle their partnership. We've seen in recent weeks Jey Uso supporting Sami Zayn as he tries to regain his Intercontinental Championship, which he was unsuccessful in doing so. But now what it seems like is we're going to be focusing on that pair trying to get the tag team titles off of JD McDonough and Finn Balor, the current iteration of the Judgment Day. Talking about evolving factions with the Bloodline, Judgment Day is another one that's evolving, which, by the way, we'll get to that in a moment. But with the Bloodline, is it running that risk of running too long? I think until WrestleMania 41, that's obviously the checkpoint. That's where we need to get to. Following WrestleMania 41, therein lies the question, how do we retain the interest of the audience to keep moving forward? Because by the time we get to WrestleMania 41, the storyline itself will be running for nearly 5 years. Yes, there are different chapters, different innings, if you will. But to carry on something of that magnitude for so long is an impressive feat in itself. So with that, like your Alien franchise, like your Avengers franchises, or whatever Hollywood blockbuster, so long as you're able to transition from one mini story to the next, that overarching story, the Bloodline, will consistently move forward and consistently be entertaining. And that's something that this current regime has done very well. Yes, there are those lulls, but you can experience and appreciate the highs without the lows. And I think the Bloodline is a perfect example of that. We talked about the Judgment Day and how their newest iteration, of course, consisting of Finn Balor, JD McDonough, Carlito, Dominic Mysterio, and one Liv Morgan, the Women's World Champion. And there was a report going around last week, I didn't cover it, but I just want to touch on that very briefly, about the rumored new name for the group being in reference to the demeaning comment that Gunther had made towards Damian Priest as well as members of the Judgment Day, referring to them as street trash. And it garnered a little bit of traction on social media. A lot of fans, myself included, were very much against it. And the report goes that Finn Balor was the one that pitched it. It was his idea to refer to themselves as street trash as a reference to the Gunther promo. Of course, whenever I bring up these reports, it should be intended to be taken with a grain of salt. We're not involved with the backstage inner workings of the WWE. We're not in these meetings. We're not receiving these pitches from said individuals. But I've always believed in the saying, where there's smoke, there is fire. And if that was a rumored pitch by one Finn Balor, I'm hoping they don't go through with it. I'm hoping they don't go through with it, because not only is it just unoriginal, uncreative, and just downright lazy, but I don't want that type of perception towards one of the factions that we've invested so much time, so much effort, and in many cases so much money towards. I don't want that. They've been doing fine just as is. They can literally keep the name The Judgment Day. I don't see why they need to change it. They could. The story of The Judgment Day, especially with what's going on between Damian and Finn, was that Finn had said, when we first overtook the group from Edge, Damian, Rhea, and Finn, that the idea was we were all equals. There were no leaders. And what I found interesting about that is, although there was no official leader, there were certain times and instances where you could argue that Rhea was the leader, Damian was the leader, Finn was the leader. Each had their moment of shine. But now that Damian and Rhea are no longer associates of this Judgment Day, why wouldn't you keep the name and try to fulfill the billings that was no leaders? He says no egos, no leaders, Judgment Day. Just keep the name. Just keep the name. But that wouldn't be the only top story on Monday Night Raw. CM Punk, Drew McIntyre. A feud, again, a long running feud that's been being told since CM Punk's return at last year's Survivor Series in Chicago last November. And we saw their matchup at SummerSlam, which I knew was going to be heavy on the storytelling because it was CM Punk's first singles match in a year, essentially, on TV, at least. And what they were able to do is further the storyline. We saw on Monday Night Raw the interaction between Drew and CM Punk, and the inclusion of the belt. I mean, the writing's on the wall, right? It's clear. CM Punk has been saying that Drew McIntyre has found his ways to duck CM Punk, to avoid CM Punk, that he's tired of running. What matchup prevents you from running? And as he's carrying this belt in his hands, the imagery, the symbolism, if it isn't already official, it's going to be a strap match of some sort, so that both competitors are linked to one another. One cannot outrun the other. And I love it. It's an old school. It's a throwback matchup. You look at how CM Punk had that fantastic dog collar match against MJF at Revolution. I'm not saying this is going to be on par with that. I would love it to be. Don't get me wrong. But let's keep our expectations reasonable. CM Punk and Drew McIntyre, again, two of the very best that WWE has to offer. I think this is the stipulation that we will get moving forward, presumably at Bash in Berlin. But I think, again, it's going to be a matchup that is heavily focused on storytelling. And I think we all know who's going to emerge victorious given who won the first match. I won't get into it, obviously, because I have to do a prediction video for Bash in Berlin probably at some point next week in the lead up to the event itself. But CM Punk and Drew McIntyre, like I said, two of the very best in the company, two of the very best in the world. No pun intended for CM Punk. We talk about the WWE, and I'm going to segue here to NXT, to the developmental brand, which has been on fire in the last year. In fact, we saw on Friday Night SmackDown, it was emanating from Orlando, Florida. We had a little bit of appearances from a few of the NXT stars. The NXT World Champion, Ethan Page. We'll get to AEW in a bit. The NXT Women's Championship. Got all this AEW on my mind now. The NXT Women's Champion, Roxanne Perez, as well as Trick Williams, made an appearance at Friday Night SmackDown. But one thing that has been so refreshing is the inclusion, the partnership of TNA Pro Wrestling and NXT. And I've seen some criticism from the online community, of course, professional wrestling fans. Daniel Bryan probably said it best back in 2019, where he referred to pro wrestling fans as fickle. Because one point you're hot, one point you're cold, hard to please them all, right? Some people are criticizing the TNA partnership, especially when it comes to the usage, or, in some cases, some people believe the overusage of one Joe Hendry. I'm a fan. He certainly got over with me in TNA. He got even more over with me in NXT. But there are some who believe, not only do they believe in Joe Hendry, but they believe that he's been overused in NXT. He's practically an NXT superstar at this point, and I wouldn't be surprised if and when his contract expires with TNA, how is he not going to join NXT? The transition is right there. Seamlessly. He'll just fit right in. When you look at NXT and the way it's currently constructed, it favors that, though. to have this influx of talent, young talent, new talent, and a way to be a feeder onto the main roster that is Monday Night Raw and Friday Night SmackDown. I wish Joe Hendry nothing but the best in terms of his career with TNA, but you can see there's a ceiling there when it comes to TNA. A couple of weeks ago on the podcast, I think the most accurate comparison I can make when it comes to the pro wrestling promotions today, WWE is the machine. It is Disney. It is the main source of entertainment when it comes to professional wrestling. It is the end all, be all. It is where the best want to be. AEW, where the best wrestle, that's their slogan, I think is very much in the line of WCW Nitro, with a lot of the good aspects of WCW Nitro. But a lot of times it has the superstars, the wrestlers that were made in WWE, that were highlighted in WWE, and bring their name over to AEW. Guys like a Bryan Danielson, Jon Moxley, Adam Copeland, Christian Cage, Chris Jericho, but still having their homegrown talent who have been able to get over on their own. MJF, Darby Allin, Britt Baker, Adam Page, so on and so forth. That is your second biggest promotion within professional wrestling. And at number 3, TNA, the indie, well, I mean, they're not really an indie. They do have a television deal, and they have their whole, TNA Plus, their own network essentially, but I see them as ECW, that third promotion in professional wrestling. And ECW was a feeder, essentially, to the WWE between 97 and 2000. And I think we've reached that point now with TNA and WWE. History is bound to repeat itself. And that's what we've gotten here. I, for one, am not tired of Joe Hendry just yet. Things can change. But it gives me something to look forward to. But I do think we need to see different faces being included in terms of the partnership. I would like to see other individuals. Can you imagine seeing a guy like Nick Nemeth, who was known as Dolph Ziggler in the WWE, in that partnership? Moose is definitely someone. Can you imagine? Real quick, Moose versus Obafemi. It won't happen because I think Obafemi's way too young. They don't want to put someone with so much promise against someone who's already established. But Obafemi versus Moose, man, you want to talk about hard-hitting matchups. That'd be fantastic. That would absolutely do it for me. But nonetheless, with NXT and its evolution, really, we look at the TV deal with CW on the horizon, and the first 2 episodes will be emanating from Chicago with a guest appearance from CM Punk, and the second being St. Louis with an appearance from Randy Orton. Big things on the horizon for NXT. So excited. So looking forward to it. And speaking of looking forward to things, how about AEW All In? This year, again, emanating from London, Wembley Stadium, the main event being Bryan Danielson challenging Swerve Strickland for the AEW World Championship in what is being billed as the Final Countdown title versus career. If you weren't thinking about buying this pay-per-view, I implore you to do so for that main event. Think about it. Bryan Danielson in what quite possibly could be his final match in his historic career. But then you have other matches that come to mind. Toni Storm defending her title against Mariah May. Mercedes Moné versus Britt Baker. The coffin match between Jack Perry, Darby Allin. We have the tag team titles in a 3-way. The trios tag titles in a ladder match. And that's just off of the top of our head. I think All In is definitely going to be one of the bigger pay-per-views that AEW will present this year. But the main matchup, the main event being Bryan Danielson versus Swerve, I think it's destined to be a great match. Give these guys 40 minutes, and that's including the entrances. Give them as much time as they need to tell this story. Of course, later this week, I will be uploading my all-in predictions regarding who will be winning each individual matchup. I will be waiting towards the end of the week, just to give them an opportunity to fill up the card, add any last-minute matches that they want to include. but it should be a banger of a show. And speaking of All In, what about All In next year? 2025, not only is it moving up to July, which I think is a very smart choice by AEW, because having All In and All Out on back-to-back weekends in the beginning of September and the ending of August, one, financially, I don't know if that's smart because you don't want to force fans to pick one over the other. I'll watch both, but you don't want to force everyone to do that. Space it out. Allow a little bit of build in between these shows. Give me incentive to follow All In. And then after the Fallout, we follow into All Out. So one, I think that's a great idea. They're expanding to Texas. It should be the biggest event AEW presents in North America, which is something to be celebrated. I, for one, am tired of hearing so many negative comments and negativity towards AEW. It's easy to pick on AEW because they're so new. But I think at this point in history, we need to learn that it is so important to have multiple successful promotions for pro wrestling in North America. When there are multiple sources of revenue, sources of entertainment, of business, it only does well for the fans who have more variety and more wrestling to watch, for the wrestlers to have more opportunities to be exposed on TV, to expose their talents and promote themselves. And it's great businesses for the arenas, for the states, specifically in North America, of course, who want to include these sources of entertainments for their fans, for the community. I think it's a great idea. I want AEW to succeed, just like I want WWE to succeed. Are there things that each company does that I might not be a fan of? Sure, absolutely, but nobody's perfect. We all have our little things we like to pick at. But ultimately, I want them all to succeed. And seeing All In being moved to Texas for 1 year, that is. We should remember that in 2026, it is slated that AEW's All In will also emanate from Wembley Stadium in 2026. We're just going to take that 1 year hiatus for Texas, which again expands to the North American audience. We're going to see a different audience, a bigger stadium. It's going to be taking place, I believe, in a baseball field, something different, a different feel for AEW. And I think that is something to look forward to. That's something definitely to commend them on. And with AEW growing, that again opens up more opportunities for the wrestlers, for the fans. I'm looking forward to it. I'm wishing them nothing but the best. But that does beg the question on what happens to Wembley Stadium. Do they have a show? I mean, Tony Khan kind of alluded to the idea that Wembley Stadium could be included in their pay-per-view slate, just not at All In. There was rumors and speculation going around that, hey, London has been an arena or a location that WWE wants to present WrestleMania. Can we see that on the horizon? Don't know. But at this point in time, pro wrestling is the hottest it has ever been in quite some time. Certainly in our lifetime. Go back to the 90s boom and think about that 30 years ago. Isn't that crazy to think about? And then prior to that, there's the 80s boom. Crazy to think about. But nonetheless, I want to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions regarding the current state of professional wrestling, whether it is the news regarding All In 2025, the lead up to All In 2024. How about the Bloodline? You heard my early exposition regarding whether it is too long into the story, how much longer are they going to go into it. I, for one, am not suffering from Bloodline fatigue, but I want to hear your guys' voice. Please sound off in the comments below. If you enjoyed this episode of the J Area Podcast, go ahead and give the video a like, give it a thumbs up, comment down your thoughts and opinions, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow all the up-to-date professional wrestling content that is produced on this channel. And of course, my name is Jose Ramos Jr. Thank you again for joining me on this episode of the J Area Podcast, and we will see you all in the next one.